The 17-foot-long motorboat that Robert Malaikini got his hands on in the 70s was known as the Sarah Joe. Sarah had been his mother, and Joe had been his father. The boat was both a tool for fishing and a monument to Robert's parents. On February 11th of 1979, Robert's 27-year-old twin brother Ralph took a group of friends on a fishing trip with the Sarah Joe. 38-year-old Benjamin Kalama, 27-year-old Scott Moorman, 26-year-old Patrick Vesner, and 31-year-old Peter Hanchett. They had been a solid friend group for several years and were looking forward to a getaway full of fishing and relaxation. Ralph himself was a fisherman by trade, so he knew what he was doing. The Sarah Joe left the harbor in Hana, Maui, Hawaii at around 10 a.m. The water was calm and the weather was peaceful, with clear skies and the sun shining brightly overhead. Everything was going well until a freakish wind suddenly started blowing in from the mountains at around 1 p.m. This wind was a clear indication that a storm was inbound, and Peter Hanchett's father, John, became concerned for the fishermen. He gathered a group of locals to spread out along the shoreline and look for the Sarah Joe in order to get the crew's attention and convince them to come ashore. Unfortunately, nobody could see the boat. It was only a few hours later when the storm came in earnest. There were high-speed winds and large waves, making the water a very dangerous place to be. John decided to go out on his own boat to search for the Sarah Joe, but he found no trace of the vessel or its crew. He was forced to return to shore empty-handed and terrified of what may have happened to his son and the rest of the men. For almost a week after the initial disappearance, the Coast Guard scoured the waters in an attempt to locate the Sarah Joe, and the friends and family of the crew also conducted their own personal searches for a full month. Helicopters and ships were utilized in the effort, and by the end of the search, roughly 73,000 miles of water had been scoured. The Coast Guard was forced to conclude their search without any answers. Local residents spent a great deal of time walking the beaches, keeping an eye out for any wreckage or bodies, but to no avail. It seemed as if the Sarah Joe had simply vanished into thin air. However, the disappearance of the Sarah Joe would take a bizarre turn on September 9th of 1988. A marine biologist named John Naughton was undergoing a wildlife expedition in the Marshall Islands, about 2,000 miles west of Maui. While he was located near an uninhabited area, they noticed a small boat that had clearly washed ashore. Naughton and his crew went to investigate the beached vessel, and they saw that the boat's registration numbers indicated that it was registered in Hawaii. They continued to search the surrounding area, and they found a makeshift grave near the wreckage. It had been built from coral rocks and a wooden cross. There was a human jawbone poking out of the grave. The group decided to record the registration number of the boat and take the information they had gathered to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard checked the number of the boat and determined that it was the Sarah Joe. Following this, the gravesite and wreckage were excavated, which revealed a partial human skeleton. The authorities used dental records to identify the skeleton as Scott Moorman, one of the Sarah Joe's crew members. However, the authorities also found some other very odd clues. There were numerous pieces of paper that had been buried alongside Scott. They were in a stack and had tinfoil sheets between each page. The Coast Guard was baffled by this discovery, as there was no clear reason for the burial of the paper. It had clearly been done intentionally, but the motive was a mystery. In the aftermath of the discovery, many questions have been posited about the case, but none of them have ever been sufficiently answered. For example, it would have taken approximately 3 months for the Sarah Joe to drift all the way to the Marshall Islands, but a government survey that was conducted 6 years before the discovery of the wreckage did not turn up any sign of the boat or the grave. If the Sarah Joe had simply floated there, the survey should have picked up on its location. Furthermore, the lagoon in which the boat was located only had one narrow entrance through the reef, making it very unlikely for an unguided boat to make it to land. Because of this, it's extremely likely that someone was conscious and steering the boat through the reef, but none of the other 4 men were ever found, alive or dead. Had Scott been alone on the boat and navigated the vessel through the reef himself, only to die shortly thereafter? Or was someone else responsible for its location? Not to mention, when did the Sarah Joe first become beached there? If it happened after the government survey, then that leaves a massive time gap between the initial disappearance and the eventual beaching in the Marshall Islands. How can this be explained? One theory in regards to the gravesite was that the papers next to Scott's remains were part of a Chinese burial ritual. According to this theory, the papers would represent money and fortune in the afterlife, and the person who had been buried with them would supposedly take those things into the next life. A private investigator named Steve Goodenow was hired to look into the case, and he found a handful of Scott's bones that the Coast Guard had not found, but other than that, he came up with nothing new or significant. He did, however, propose an extension to the theory of the Chinese burial ritual. According to Goodenow's theory, a group of Chinese fishermen were fishing in the area when they saw the Sarah Joe with Scott's dead body inside. They commandeered the boat, took it through the reef, and then buried Scott as respectfully as they could. They failed to report the incident because their fishing operation had been in an illegal part of the islands. This theory seems fairly likely, but it has yet to be confirmed. Hopefully we can discover the truth someday, but until then, the disappearance of the Sarah Joe remains a chilling marine mystery. Three-year-old Billy Jones Jr. was born in Bridgetown, New Jersey, to his parents Evelyn Jones and William Ebenezer Jones Sr. The family resided in Vineland, New Jersey, with Billy's sister Jill and younger brother whose name I could not find. On the morning of December 17, 1962, Billy and Jill accompanied their mother while she ran some errands, first going to the bank and then getting a haircut. At around 11:45 a.m., after getting back home, Billy and Jill took 2 of their dogs outside to play. Evelyn stayed inside, making lunch and taking care of her youngest child, who was still an infant. She continuously looked out the windows to check on her kids. At one point, she left the window to check on the baby, and when she returned, Billy was gone. At around 1 p.m., Jill came back in the house holding a plastic plant. Evelyn asked where Billy had gone, and Jill told her mother that Billy had been taken by the boogeyman. This chilling sentence sucked the life out of Evelyn. Children have wild imaginations, and she by no means believed in the boogeyman, but Jill had seen someone take her son. Evelyn began a search of the neighborhood, and something rather suspicious occurred during this time. While she was walking around the streets, a green car approached Evelyn, and the driver asked if she was Mrs. Jones. Evelyn didn't recognize the man, so she ignored him. About an hour later, Evelyn was still empty-handed and in a panic. She called the police and reported Billy missing, which initiated a large-scale search effort of the surrounding area. The National Guard, K-9 units, and hundreds of police officers were involved. They scoured rivers, forests, and even an old abandoned amusement park, but Billy was nowhere to be found. Due to the plastic flower Jill had in her hand when she first told her mother about the boogeyman, the police initially believed that one of Evelyn's neighbors who sold plastic flowers must have been involved. However, they soon discovered that the plant had been taken from a neighbor's trash can, and it was shared amongst the neighborhood kids. The flower was concluded to be irrelevant to the case. Law enforcement eventually searched a nearby tourist attraction known as the Palace of Depression. The building was a compilation of junk metal and other scrap materials that had been built in the 1930s. The police theorized that Billy may have wandered into the palace out of curiosity, but there was no sign of the boy anywhere in or around the property. Navy helicopters performed aerial searches, and bloodhounds picked up Billy's scent, only to lose it while they were still on the Jones family's property. During the search effort, Evelyn realized that Billy was not the only family member missing. Their basset hound, Baby, was also unaccounted for. However, Baby soon turned up in the neighborhood, soaking wet from the snow. The basset hound was alone. A new theory soon emerged after law enforcement discovered there had been a trash collection on the day of Billy's disappearance. They speculated that Billy may have climbed into a trash can and was accidentally taken by the garbage collectors, or alternatively, the garbage collectors may have kidnapped and murdered Billy, using their profession as a means of disposing of his body. The workers were questioned, but denied seeing anything unusual that day. The landfill was searched by the authorities to no avail. Lead after lead was followed and dropped, causing Evelyn to become desperate. She found a local psychic and had a reading done. The psychic told her that Billy was still alive and the abductor had been a man whose wife was suffering from mental illness due to the death of her own child. The psychic then told Evelyn that Billy had most likely been taken to an Amish area of Pennsylvania and was being raised in a new family. At a later point in time, in 1964, a different psychic alleged that Billy had been killed in a hit-and-run. The perpetrator had panicked and buried him nearby. Neither of these psychics were able to provide anything useful to the investigators, and they were simply running the same exploitative business of taking advantage of a grieving mother. In the 1980s, Jill was put under hypnosis as a means of getting her to remember more details about her brother's disappearance. She recalled holding her brother's hand as they watched two men arguing in front of the Palace of Depression. She couldn't remember anything else until she got back to the house. The case stagnated with no new evidence coming in, and it eventually went cold. It was reopened in 2009 with the hope that advancements in DNA testing technology would help generate new leads, but the effort failed. Billy's disappearance remains one of the longest-standing unsolved missing persons cases in New Jersey, and the identity of the boogeyman has never been revealed. Click the join button to become a member today. Channel members receive exclusive content as well as early access to all my content. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was a passenger flight that was traveling from Malaysia to China on March 8th of 2014. There were 12 crew members aboard the plane, each of them a Malaysian citizen. There were 227 passengers from 14 different countries also aboard the plane. 38 minutes after takeoff, while flying over the South China Sea, air traffic control lost contact with the plane. The Malaysian military's radar system tracked the plane as it deviated west from its original flight path and crossed over the Andaman Sea. It eventually left the radar range over northwest peninsular Malaysia. After this, the plane simply disappeared. There was no communication from the crew and no sightings of the vehicle. All crew members and passengers were presumed dead, which constituted the deadliest incident with a Boeing 777 until a separate incident later that same year. The search effort for the wreckage quickly became the most expensive search in the history of the aviation industry. It was focused most heavily on the South China Sea and the Andaman Sea, but this was soon changed. An analysis of the flight's automated communications with the satellite revealed that the plane had traveled further south than the authorities had originally thought. This information indicated that the plane had likely gone down over the Indian Ocean. In 2015 and 2016, several pieces of debris from the plane washed up in the western Indian Ocean, but the rest of the wreckage was never recovered. In January of 2017, the search effort was suspended due to its lack of success. In January of 2018, the search was taken up by a private contractor called Ocean Infinity, which also failed to locate the plane after 6 months. The cause of the plane's disappearance has been a subject of speculation for years. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau initially proposed their theory that the plane underwent a hypoxia event, or in other words, the cabin suddenly decompressed due to either an impact or human error. Other people speculated that a hijacking may have occurred, although this theory is most likely a sensational one with no basis in reality. Out of the various pieces of debris found, the first was the right flaperon, a metal surface piece of the wing. It washed up on a beach in Saint Andre, Réunion, an island in the western Indian Ocean. In February of 2016, an object with the label "No Step" was found off the coast of Mozambique. Analysis of the part suggested that it had likely come from either the plane's horizontal stabilizer or the leading edges of the wings. Various other pieces of the aircraft were discovered around the western Indian Ocean, some of them being identified as parts of the engine. In the final report from the Malaysian Ministry of Transport, it was revealed that the plane had been manually steered off of its flight path. To this day, it remains unknown who made this decision and why they made it. However, the deviation in flight path went unnoticed for 20 minutes before anyone was made aware of the update. This breakdown in communication was likely a contributing factor in the tragedy. There is a lot more information about the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, but most of it is extremely technical and not really in my wheelhouse. If you have an interest in a deep knowledge of planes, then I highly recommend doing some research on this case, but for me personally, I don't fully understand all the minute details. Overall, the plane's deviation from its course was unprecedented and unexpected, and its subsequent disappearance is just as mysterious as it is tragic. Hopefully the full wreckage can be found one day and answers can come to light, but until then, this remains one of the worst aviation disasters in history. Karolina Olsson was born into a family of 5 children on the island of Okno in southern Sweden in 1861. Okno is a peaceful forested island that is now a popular destination for domestic tourists. Back in the 19th century, Okno was even more secluded than it is today. Karolina was homeschooled and didn't enroll in the local school until she was 14. She had also worked around the house, helping the family with anything and everything they needed. She was a homebody due to her childhood, but when she finally did enroll in school, she was forced to walk 5 kilometers every single day. She did so without complaint. On February 22nd of 1876, 14-year-old Karolina returned home from school complaining about a toothache she had. Her mother suggested that the toothache was a product of witchcraft, and she instructed her daughter to go to bed. Karolina obeyed and fell asleep. 1 hour of sleep became a day, then a day became a week became a month, and a month became a year. Karolina Olsson remained asleep for 32 years. Her family made repeated attempts to wake her up, but none were successful. They were poor and could not afford a doctor, so Karolina's mother stayed by her side and cared for her. Local doctors eventually caught wind of Karolina's situation, and they paid the family a visit free of charge. These medical practitioners attempted to wake the girl up with a variety of methods, but none worked. In 1892, Karolina was admitted to Oskarshamn Hospital, where the doctors treated her to electric shocks. She had no reaction to the treatment. Karolina remained in the hospital for a full month, completely unresponsive to physical touch, but nonetheless alive. In 1905, Karolina's mother passed away, and an intriguing new development occurred. After her mother's death, Karolina began crying hysterically in her sleep. It was like she knew what was going on around her without ever actually being conscious. One of her brothers died in 1907, and she once again started crying hysterically, just like the episode with her mother's passing. On several occasions, Karolina was found crawling around on the floor, but she was still fast asleep. At one point, her father heard her shouting a prayer at the top of her lungs, but immediately afterwards she went back to sleep. She survived on 2 glasses of milk per day, which were fed to her by a maid. It was on April 3rd of 1908 when the maid entered Karolina's room to find the girl crawling around on the floor and sobbing. She asked the maid for her mother, but did not recognize her brothers when they entered the room. She was frail, malnourished, and confused, but she was awake for the first time in 32 years. She exhibited an extreme sensitivity to light, and she could barely speak, but she was still alive. Doctors, writers, and locals visited the Olsson home to witness the woman who had fallen asleep at 14 years old and woken up at 46 years old. She was still capable of reading and writing, but she was found to be lacking in every other subject. She could remember the day she fell asleep vividly, including the pain she had been experiencing in her teeth. However, she could not remember anything after falling asleep. Karolina spent the remainder of her life working in the Olsson family home, gardening and performing household tasks. She passed away on April 5th of 1950 from an aneurysm, having reached 88 years of age. To this day, there is no conclusive answer as to what happened to Karolina Olsson. Some people have speculated that the coma was at least partially fabricated, or perhaps exaggerated, but for what reason nobody can say. Others believe that Karolina had some sort of undiagnosed medical condition related to the toothache, but what this condition could have been is also unknown. It doesn't seem likely that anyone will ever know the truth of what happened to Karolina Olsson. Some mysteries are fated to remain mysterious forever.